You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 259. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Have you ever noticed that when you do something repeatedly, when you practice the same thing for years, that over time and with repetition, you develop a technique and an instinct for doing that thing that almost becomes part of your DNA? It could be a general life skill that you have practiced and perfected over time, like making your favorite recipe or the way that you prepare your coffee. It could be your killer serve or the way that you approach your loved ones when you know that you'd like to persuade them of something and it's going to take time, right? You might have a process that you follow to win them to your way of thinking. At work, you likely have the same thing. There are professional skills, strategies that you have perfected over time. It could be the protocol that you follow when you prepare for court in the morning, the step-by-step process that makes you feel confident by the time you step foot in the courtroom. It could be the way that you approach a deal, the precedent system that you have, the checklist that you have, whether it's in your head or written down somewhere. It could be the way that you break down big projects and have an idea in your mind and a way of executing among your team members so that the pieces of the project all get completed step by step and your team is empowered and at the same time able to deliver exactly what it is that you need. These are skills that you develop and perfect over time. Often these are things that you cannot just know innately. These are not things that AI can just tell you. These are experiences that you've practiced, that you've refined, where you've made mistakes and you've made corrections and you've found by design or by accident that some things work better than others. And the reason that I'm starting out today's podcast episode by inviting you to think about where in your life you have developed these innate processes, your way of doing things, is that is how I'm feeling right now about the way I'm approaching my coaching practice. And I want to share that with you. Now, a simple analogy comes to mind for me, and I'll share that with you because we might come back to it in this episode. But tonight for dinner, I'm making my kids sweet tomato pasta. Now, you may have a recipe that you go to time and again that is a winner. And for me, that is a winner. It's a recipe that I invented when my son was very young. It was a quick weeknight recipe that involves very few ingredients, 5 of them altogether, and a technique that I have perfected over time such that only I can make sweet tomato pasta for my kids. It involves tomatoes, fresh garlic, oil, salt, and fresh basil, which, if we have it on hand, is sort of the finishing touch. And what I have experienced through trial and error is that in order to make the perfect sweet tomato pasta sauce, I need the right ingredients. I need fresh tomatoes. If they're not sweet enough, then the sauce isn't going to caramelize just so. If I have fresh garlic, right, the fresher the better. And if I let it simmer too long in the oil and it gets crispy, it's not going to have the right flavor relative to if I add the tomatoes fresh, chopped, watery before the garlic reaches that point. It's leaving the simmering garlic and oil and tomatoes on the stovetop long enough that the tomatoes reduce and they form this sweet sauce. And then just at the end, adding enough basil, not too much because my kids don't like that, just enough basil to add a little bit of flavor so that when the meal hits the table, I have a guaranteed result. My children will eat this meal. And if you have children who are like my children who do not eat everything that you put in front of them, that can be a real gift. So I've reached this point, much like with sweet tomato pasta, there's an art, there's a science, and it just happens innately. I've reached a point in my coaching practice where what I've found is that there's a recipe, there is a formula, there is this step-by-step framework that I'm following behind the scenes that is helping me support the lawyers who are coming to me for coaching. And this is based on the experiences that I've had since 2018, when I first started coaching lawyers professionally. And what I have noticed is that lawyers come to me as a coach for certain discrete problems, things that they are struggling with, areas where they are stuck, goals they have that they want support with, where they feel like having someone like me to support them would be really helpful. That has led to conversations with hundreds of lawyers, coaching conversations with hundreds of lawyers, where I've been able to support them in all sorts of different ways. And what I have distilled over time, because I'm wanting to be more effective in the way that I deliver my coaching, more effective in the way that I describe it to my clients, making it easier, not only for lawyers who may not be familiar with coaching to understand how this is something that can support them and help them reach success in their practice, help them get unstuck. We all get stuck, and sometimes having someone help you get unstuck is like magic, right? It's like all the ideas are there. You just need someone to help you unlock them. And so I want to be able to deliver more effectively, and I want to be able to explain more effectively, because I want you to know, as my client, as a lawyer who is working with me, who's listening to this very podcast, I want you to understand frameworks that will help you, whether we work together or not, to understand what's going on in your practice, understand where the levers might be, understand where you might be struggling, so that it's more clear to you where you can take your next steps, how you can get unstuck if you're feeling that way, and if we work together, how I can support you in executing. So this really is the culmination of 8 years of experience. And where I'm at in my practice right now is I'm doing a lot of work behind the scenes, creating my structures, creating my frameworks, almost writing the recipes, right? My sweet tomato pasta recipe, for example, it's not written down anywhere. I've tried to explain it to people. You may have gathered a little bit from today's conversation, but it's creating the recipes, right? The recipes for the work that I've been doing over the past 8 years, and a menu so that I can describe it better, so that when you are in that stuck point, you have a place where you can go. So over the next 3 weeks, what I'm going to do is share with you the 3 main pillars, if you will, or the 3 main areas where lawyers have come to me and how I can support them through coaching, not only to help explain what I do, but also to help you see the challenges that you might have in your practice and where they fit in relation to these 3 main areas. And I'm going through them in sequence. This week, we're going to talk about time management, because that is typically the first place where lawyers will experience pain points when their practice starts to feel misaligned, or it feels like not quite right, or they're starting to get stuck. Next week, we're going to talk about career strategy. This reveals itself a little bit more slowly. It's a little bit deeper. It's not as visceral sometimes as a time management problem, and it can build up over time, and it can feel a bit more daunting because it's not as clear what to do next. It's not as easy to develop a 2-step strategy to manage it better. And so next week, we're going to dive into the career strategy, and that's really the clarity piece. And then in the next week's episode, so this will be the 3rd episode in this 3-part series, we're going to talk about confidence. We're going to talk about leadership. We're going to talk about the identity shifts that I help lawyers go through when they are looking to expand, when they're looking to grow, when you have reached a point in your practice where you're feeling stuck and what you want is to elevate yourself to the next level, right? This is where you might find that you've reached a ceiling in terms of where you see yourself, your capacity, right? You might find that you're ready to grow, but you're almost like hitting up against that internal thermostat. And this is where those identity shifts are so powerful, and they feel really scary sometimes, because what it means is giving up a strategy and identity that has served you, that has helped to get you to the place that you're at currently. And yet you know that if you want to move into that next level, right, whether it's a formal title, associate to partner to practice group leader, lawyer to judge, you're shifting into a new identity. And so the coaching there goes really deep. And that is where it can feel really daunting to, number one, even admit or see that is a potential problem, a challenge, a growth area, an area for opportunity. You may not see it because you're in it. And also what it means to go through a transformation where you're effectively changing who you are, the way you see yourself, your identity. So that's what I have in store over the next 3 weeks. And I'm really excited to share this with you again, because this is based on my experience as a coach. This is based on conversations that were the real conversations. It's married with my own learning as a coach and the skills and the tools that I have developed through the work that I've been doing with lawyers, through the continuing education and training and coaching that I receive myself in order to be a better coach for you. So I'm excited for these episodes, and I really hope that by listening to them, you start to see where there's opportunities for growth for you. You start to see tangible things you can do just from listening to these episodes. And also, if what you feel at the end of the episode is, I want more of this, I want to take this work further, then absolutely do reach out, because I would love to support you through the work that I do coaching lawyers. So with that, we're going to dive into this first area, which is time management. And time management to me is such a great litmus test. It is a very identifiable, tangible way to sense when things are not on track. Now, for anybody who sails or is familiar with sailboats generally, there is this idea of telltale signs, right? You've probably heard telltale signs. It comes from sailing. Now, I am not a sailor. I would never identify myself that way. That would be criminal. But I have taken sailing lessons, and one of the things that I've learned through those lessons is that a sail on a sailboat, at least the ones that I learned on, will have at the tip of the sail, right? Not quite at the top, but somewhere near the top, these strings, right? Strings attached to the sail. And there's a little portal of clear plastic through which you can see these strings, at least on the boats that I learned on. And you might imagine these as red strings. In my mind, they're red strings because that's what I learned on. And when your sails are full of wind and you are moving ahead gracefully and you're just like everything is great, your telltale signs are flying straight behind the sail or straight along the sail. So you might imagine if you've got long hair, or if you've ever had long hair and you're moving in the right direction, the wind is just pulling all your hair or pushing all your hair straight behind you. That's what your telltale signs look like when you're on the right track. And when you are not on the right track, when you get stuck in the doldrums, to use sailing terminology, that's when you get caught in a patch of wind and you're stuck, you stop moving. Your telltale signs, or the telltale signs on your sailboat, are not flowing all in one direction behind the sail. They are kind of moving all over the place. Some are sticking up, some are sticking down. They might flop down and stay still for a minute, and then they fly up. And it's almost like when you're stuck in a windstorm and your hair is blowing in all different directions and it's in your face. You can't see straight. Maybe it's painful because the wind is whipping so hard. That's when you're stuck. And time feels like that because it's in the minute. It's visceral. And when your time feels like, I'm in a hurry, I feel so stressed, I'm missing deadlines, people are upset with me, I'm scared to communicate with people, this is a visceral visceral sign. And going back to the idea of it being telltale, sometimes it's telltale of the fact that you need systems, you need better time management strategies so that you can get control over your time. And sometimes it's a sign that there's something else going on. So I mentioned before that there's going to be 3 episodes in this series. So sometimes time management can be solved by using time management strategies. And sometimes there's something more, right? There's a clarity question, you're not on the right track, or an identity question, right? There's something that's not aligning with the person that you want to be, the lawyer who you want to identify as. And an example of this is procrastination. When you procrastinate, for example, I like to distinguish between small p procrastination and big P procrastination. Small p procrastination is you don't have the right tools and systems to deal with procrastination in the moment. So you go to write the brief, you get a little bit nervous, you start to feel dread, you avoid the project, you surf the internet, you go get a coffee, whatever. And you learn that with the right strategy, you can actually sit down and get that thing done. You no longer have that small p procrastination, or at least you feel it, but you've got more tools to deal with it. Big P procrastination is you need to write the brief and you can have all the tips and tricks, but the problem isn't so much that. The problem is that actually you hate writing briefs. The subject matter that you're in is all wrong. There's something deeper than that is holding you back. And that is a bigger investigation. That's where we get into the big P. So time management challenges can sometimes be a symptom of something that's relatively minor or something that's a lot deeper than that. So that's why I love time management, is that it's such a great entry point to understanding what's going on with you. And it's a really great signal sometimes of something that might be a little bit deeper. The other reasons that I love time management is that time management is something that we can all relate to. We all have the same number of hours in a day. For most of us, most lawyers that I work with, most professionals that I work with, parents of young children, people who may not be parents, but you've got lots of commitments, right? You're on committees, you're on teams, you have aging parents, you've got your friends, you've got your travel, you've got a life, right? We are all busy, and busy is one of those words where we can all relate, right? And sometimes busy is worn with a badge of honor, but nobody will judge you or fault you or question you for being busy, right? It's not something that we feel ashamed of most of the time. So it's an easy point of entry in terms of conversation. We can talk about being busy and struggling with time management without feeling embarrassed. And so that's great because it means that we're going to talk pretty openly about it. Feels relatively low risk to tell someone, oh, I'm really busy and I'd love some help to figure out how to manage my time better. The risk is relatively small and the reward is relatively high, right? You don't have to give up very much in order to get what is potentially a really big reward, which would be more control over your time, better managed time, more peace, less stress, and all of that. So what does it look like? If you are struggling with time management, chances are you know it, right? You know it, you feel it. You don't need me to tell you. But here's what I will tell you that I see in my practice. When lawyers struggle with time management, they will often, and maybe this is you, maybe you feel really busy. You might describe yourself as feeling really busy and rushed all the time. It's almost like you wake up, your alarm goes off, and already there's this feeling in your stomach, the pit of your stomach that, I'm behind. I've got to get moving. I've got to get started. Oh, what is that thing? What is my to-do list for today? And you feel rushed. You feel pressured. You might feel like your time does not belong to you, that you are not the owner of your time. You know, this is really common, right? You may be really good at actioning when the pressure's on, the deadline is tight, the filing date is tomorrow. But when you don't have pressure, you might find it's really hard to actually get anything done. And this is the worst, right? It's like you've been waiting for that window of time, that window of opportunity to sit down and write the brief or tackle the contract or have the difficult conversation that you've been putting off. And the minute your schedule frees up, instead of doing the work that you told yourself you would do, that time just slips by, right? You're on the internet, you're online shopping, you're talking to a colleague, you're organizing your banking when you hadn't planned to organize your banking. You know, you get sidetracked on these projects. And the time that you had to do this thing that you know is really important just slips by. And you might ask yourself or tell yourself it's a problem. right? I can't get motivated if I'm not really stressed or busy or under a tight deadline. Maybe that is part of it. But that's often a sign that there are opportunities. There's techniques, there's strategies to help you better manage your time, whether it's managing your workflow better, whether it's having tools so that when you've got that time, you know how to deal with that time. You can structure it. You can create some blocks in there. You can use some techniques that will help you capitalize on the time instead of watching it drift by with very little or nothing to show for it at the end of the day. Now, I'm going to break down certain categories of time management because, again, this might really help you understand where you could get support and what other lawyers are going through and help you feel not alone in this, and also hopeful and optimistic that there's support, right? There are tools and strategies that are available to you. So if you struggle with executive function, and here I will include lawyers who have ADHD or other forms of neurodivergence, or simply you struggle with certain aspects of your executive functioning skills. Executive functioning skills are the skills that each of us has as human beings that help us, as you would expect, execute on tasks. And it sounds really boring. And before I became a coach, I remember my mom telling me about executive skills and kind of drifting off. I didn't think it was very interesting at the time. Now I absolutely find them fascinating, and I understand how those are the skills that separate you from thinking about an idea and actually getting that idea completed, going from idea to tangible outcome. So your executive skills, if this is new to you, these are these skills. It's your highest level of functioning, right? As a human being with the ability to plan. And I'm starting to get into the skills. Plan, organize, stick to a task long enough to complete it, prioritize what needs to happen first. Your ability to regulate your emotions, right? If you're feeling dread and you're procrastinating, that is an emotional regulation question, as well as other executive skills like initiation, right? Initiating a task, like impulse control, right? Resisting the impulse or overcoming the impulse to do something else that feels less uncomfortable than the task that you have on hand. Things like time management, estimating time. I think I mentioned planning, but all that forward thinking, planning, these are all executive skills, right? Task stick-to-itiveness, not getting distracted or maintaining focus. These are all skills. And the really fascinating part, working memory is a key executive functioning skill. And the magic to these skills is that when you understand them, you can leverage them to have a much more managed practice, right? You see that you're really good at planning, so then you can lean into that skill. You may have difficulty with working memory. Well, now you know that you should have systems to write things down and externalize them so that you're not relying so much on your memory. And with your executive skills, they are finite, right? You'll find by the end of the day that they get worn down. So we really want to find ways to preserve them and to use them efficiently. And when you do that, then you start to notice real shifts in your practice. So I'm starting here because to me, understanding your executive skills is a brilliant way to set yourself up for success because you understand how you work best. And there are very tangible, easy techniques that you can use to support yourself and get things done, which when we think of time management is often what we want. We want to get things done. We don't want to procrastinate. We want to be efficient. We want to plan things in an organized way. So if you struggle with executive function, you might find that you struggle with those things, right? You find it really hard to plan your projects, right? You might feel really disorganized. You might look at your calendar if you have one. Maybe you don't even have a calendar that's external to you. Everything's in your head, in which case it might feel really jumbled. If you struggle with planning and sequencing, you might not really feel confident when you sit down to do a project, or maybe you feel like planning is a waste of time, right? This is a real killer. If you don't plan, you might find that you get really caught up at the beginning of a project because you don't know where to start. You don't know what happens next. You're not able to see that 3 steps down the road, you're going to need someone's help. You could assign that work at the outset as opposed to waiting, keeping track of things, right? You might find there's multiple inputs for your work. And so are there ways of keeping track of that work? You might struggle to meet deadlines because you don't necessarily have a clear picture of when they are or how long it's going to take you to complete a project that has a deadline, whether it's a filing deadline or an internal deadline. You might struggle with what's on your plate, right? Again, you might have that sense of overwhelm, like there's so much to do, but you don't necessarily have one place where it's all written down or it's all easily accessible. And so you find you're spinning, trying to remember what exactly is it that you're supposed to do today. You might struggle with recording time, right? Number one, just forcing yourself to sit down and do it. And then when you are doing it, you might feel like you've got too much time. It took too long to work on this project. You weren't 100% efficient. So-and-so down the hall would have done it faster. You might have an internal dialogue that's preventing you from recording time. You might find that it's too little time, right? You've been at the office for 10 hours. How is it that you only have 3 billable hours? So you might be almost lamenting that and having a really sort of difficult conversation with yourself about that. So these are all ways in which executive function might be holding you back in your time management practices. And what that can lead to is a practice that feels really stressful. And you might find that people are finding it difficult to work with you because they're not sure if when they work with you, they're going to be receiving the work product that they need for their portion of a project on time. Are they going to get the updates that they need? Are the materials going to be completed in a way that meets the expectations or requirements that they have? So this is one of those areas where there are fixes, there are solutions. And so if this resonates with you, then there's absolutely a lot of support out there for you. And one of the offerings I have is within my podcast series, there's a 4-part series about executive function and time management. We'll link to the episodes in the show notes that go with this episode. They're also in another supporting document that will link to this episode, which is a time management podcast roadmap. There's a number of episodes that I've recorded all about time management. And so there's a single document that contains most of those. I might update it before this podcast episode goes live, but right now it's updated, I think, to about a year. So we're 2026 now, 2025, with episodes that deal with time management, including the ones about executive function. So try to see yourself here. And where would this potentially be helpful for you in your practice? Because there are ways to deal with this. Again, this is relatively low risk, right? What you have to lose by learning about the way your brain works and trying some new techniques, really nothing. And there is so much to gain. Other areas where you might struggle, prioritizing. And prioritizing is so much more than just deciding what needs to go first, right? Again, going back to time management as something that can be relatively discrete, relatively day-to-day, relatively systems focused. Prioritizing at a very surface level is simply deciding what needs to go first. So if I look at my sweet tomato pasta recipe, what do I need to do first? Well, I need to go to the store and make sure that I've got the right ingredients. I need tomatoes. I need to make sure I've got oil in the cupboard. I like to use avocado oil these days. In the past, I've used olive oil or grapeseed oil. Now I'm all scared about using, seed oils, and olive oil, the smoke point isn't high enough. So I'm using avocado oil. You need the right oil. You need the fresh garlic. You need the fresh basil if it's available. Salt I always have on hand, so I'm not worried about that. But prioritizing, well, do I have the ingredients, right? That would be priority number 1. So for you, if you're thinking about a project, maybe it's an application that you're filing for court, maybe you need an affidavit, and the affidavit needs to be signed by somebody who is really hard to get a hold of. So that's probably going to be one of those things that you're going to want to plan in advance, right? For me next, if I'm thinking about the pasta, well, I'm probably going to cut up the tomatoes. I'm going to get the garlic going. I'm going to put the oil in the pan first. I'm going to heat it up. When it's hot enough, I'll add the garlic. After it's sauteed for a while, I'll add the tomatoes. I'll probably chop the tomatoes while the garlic is sauteing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see how you're prioritizing what needs to happen. And that can happen at a fairly detail or end product level, right? It's kind of the surface prioritizing. But there's also this big picture prioritizing, right? So I mentioned small p procrastination, big P procrastination. I suppose you could say the same thing with prioritizing. Within a project, there's that micro prioritizing, but there's big picture. And that's where you start to get into those deeper levels of what should you be prioritizing, right? If you're looking at it from your career perspective versus not. And so this can ask you or beg of you to ask different questions, right? If you can only work on one project this week, which one are you going to choose? which one gets to go first. And what's really tricky with priorities that people don't usually jump to is that priorities mean that you're going to be saying no to things, right? If you think about a true priority, the meaning of it is one thing, right? We use priorities in the plural, which is grammatically, technically incorrect. But if you only had that one thing, you would be saying no to everything else. And so you can imagine that means you're now setting boundaries. And I recently recorded an episode about this. I think it's little no, big yes, something like that. It's a very recent episode. And the point that I'm making in that episode is that boundaries, while we see them as something negative, right? This constricting thing that I'm doing that is almost like inflicting something on somebody else. No, that is actually not at all where boundaries come into play. Boundaries come into play because you're protecting something really important. So when you set your priorities, right, you've got the prioritized task, but you've also decided which tasks are going to get priority. You're going to need to have communication with other people. And this is where coaching conversations start to get really interesting, because this is where people will often struggle, right? They're implementing, or they're trying to implement their new boundaries. They're trying to implement structures. And it means they have to have really difficult conversations, often with colleagues and clients, people who are stakeholders in their career, people that they want to keep happy. And they're having to find a way to say no, or not on this timeline, or yes, and we're going to need to do this a different way. So that is where time management and other elements, right? How you see yourself, right? That could be an identity question. If you see yourself as the person who always gets the job done, and now you're going to assert a boundary where you're not going to be that person, you might risk disappointing that person, and you might also have an identity shift going on. So I'm kind of giving you a bit of a sneak peek into week 3, right? That identity question. But at a very surface level, what we're doing is we're setting priorities, and then from there, we're implementing. So if you struggle with priorities, you might find you've got way too much on your plate, right? There's this whole hodgepodge of tasks and all these things. You might find that you get stuck with work that is not aligned with your goals. It's maybe lower level work than what you want. It's work you don't like to do. Maybe it's files that nobody else will touch, but people know that you'll say yes. And so they flock to you. Maybe it's that whole, give something, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. Maybe you're that busy person. People know that if they come to you, you'll get it done. And this might be a really great success strategy. You're there for all people at all times. If it's a success strategy, I ask you to please consider the long-term effects of this. Number one, for your health and sustainability, but also if your life circumstances change. So I know for a lot of lawyers, myself included, that was a strategy that really worked before having a family, right? When I didn't have to worry about picking my kids up from daycare or being at home to make them meals. That was really great. I could be there for all people at all times. And many of the lawyers that I work with have had that experience. And when they then have a family, they have young kids at home, or something happens in their personal life. Maybe it's burnout. Maybe it's a decision. They no longer want to be that person. Now you're going to need a new skill, which is not only asserting some sort of a boundary, but finding a way to differentiate yourself, finding a way to deliver value that is different from the value of being there 24/7, right? So you might think about the 7-Eleven, right? The offerings that are there 24/7. People will go there for convenience. But what about the fine dining restaurant that is closed on Sundays and Mondays and only offers this one menu, but people will pay? They will line up to go and have that experience because they value it so much. So how can you shape your practice in such a way that is the type of value that you are creating, as opposed to the not having the priorities set and doing everything for everybody? You might find that you feel a bit helpless, like you have no choice in the matter. You might really struggle to keep up. You're really struggling. You might find that the more you're struggling, the harder it is even to communicate with people, right? The deadlines are piling up and you're just so overwhelmed. You don't even know who to reach out to. You can also feel really resentful, right? You're working so hard. You don't have much to show for it. Your practice isn't going the direction that you want it. You're asking yourself why it is that people at your level are moving past you in your organization. Why are you stuck where you are with the work you have? So that's another area, which would be prioritization at many levels in your practice. So another area where time management can come up as well is confidence, right? It's confidence, not only of those priorities that you've selected, but in the way that you communicate with other people about those priorities. So I've touched on this already, but turning to why we often don't communicate our boundaries, confidence can often be at the heart of this. And so, that might mean that you're saying yes when it's unrealistic to do so. You may already have a number of items on your plate and you know it, and you're saying yes because you're afraid to say no, or you don't even have a clear sense of what's already on your plate. You've taken on so much, you're unable to keep track of it. And so you say yes, and then you find yourself kind of stuck. It's that confidence to send the update, right? Like, I'm sure you've had this experience. I know I have many times where you're working on something, you start to see that either it's going to take longer because it's more complicated than you anticipated, or something bad has happened, right? Like, I don't know, a client didn't provide the documents that you needed on time, or they did provide the documents and you see something really awful in those documents, or you learn about a case that undermines the strength of your case, or just something happens and it feels so uncomfortable and you know that you want to talk to somebody about it, but then you kind of don't because you want to solve it before you bring it up as a problem. And sometimes that works, but sometimes it just means that you're prolonging the inevitable, and the person that you ultimately speak with has less time to then help you troubleshoot and deal with the problem. So that can keep you stuck. And you might also find that you start receiving those nudges, right? Those kind of polite emails. It's hard to tell. Are they passive aggressive? They almost seem a little bit terse. Where are we at on this project? Do you have an update? And you start to wonder, have I left this person hanging? Are they upset with me? And then your mind wanders even more, if it wasn't already wandering, into the relationship aspect of, am I in trouble? Like, are they never going to want to work with me again? So all of this, right? You start to get distracted by your own thoughts and things get slower. And so you can see how a lack of confidence can also impact your time management. And in fact, when we get through the 3 weeks of this podcast series, you'll probably start to see the way that I see how all the different pieces of a lawyer's practice start to fit together. When we look at time management, when we look at career clarity, when we look at confidence and leadership, you'll see how the pieces all tie together and how we can basically make some changes in one area that have impact on another. It's absolutely incredible. So I'm glad you're with me. I'm glad we're talking about this. And I'm really hoping that by diving deep into time management, you're starting to see, okay, I can see where there's opportunities here. And then a couple other categories, structure and support, right? If you don't have structures in place, which is normal, most people aren't taught how to manage their time. They need to figure it out and piece it together on their own. So when you start to have systems, when you have people who can actually help you and train you, that can help so much with dealing with the technical things like deadlines, like dealing with interruptions, like dealing with distraction, last minute changes, emergencies, emails. I don't know a single lawyer who doesn't struggle with their emails, and other people, right? Their needs, their interruptions, them coming to you, phoning, coming into your office. And so what happens is when you start to develop systems and structures, you can start to feel a lot less overwhelmed. You'll feel a lot more focused because you're not kind of losing your focus, feeling stress and wondering about deadlines, and your practice doesn't feel so out of control. So again, you get this sense of control. Of course, you don't control the world, but you control your practice, and that can feel so good and just shift the way that you practice, shift your confidence levels, shift the focus of your practice. And what you'll also notice is if time management, right, again, we're kind of going back to this, is the entry point for seeking coaching, right? So these are lawyers that have come to me who are like, I'd really love some help with this. You might complain about a lack of predictability, right? My schedule is so unpredictable. I can't plan for anything. I can't plan for anything in my professional life, let alone my personal life. Forget signing up for a spin class. I'll always have to cancel. I say yes to dinner dates, but I know I'm going to have to push it back or not show up. I can't plan a holiday. You can't attend family events, family gatherings. You might find that your self-care really starts to suffer, right? You're eating lunch at your desk. It's this sort of messy, not very ceremonious thing. You might start to feel really low energy. You're not getting enough sleep. You're not really taking care of yourself. You're eating a lot of sweet treats, drinking a lot of coffee just to stay energized. And that's starting to take its toll on you. You might find it harder to stay focused, right? You're not getting any downtime. And so you are at your computer, but you're sitting there and time just slips by and you're not really getting anything done. This can lead to fatigue. It can lead to burnout, right? You might find you're really getting into a situation where it's starting to affect you at a very deep level. And if this continues, you may be questioning, right? Big picture, how long are you going to keep this up? Like, you feel miserable. How is this sustainable? Is this really the life that you signed up for? So again, these are reasons why lawyers will reach out to me and I can help you, right? If this is something you relate to, I can help you. We can start to develop systems. We can take that whole inventory of what it is that's going on in your practice. We can audit it, right? Like, you imagine clearing out a closet. You want to start out by seeing what's in there in the first place. So we do that audit, we can figure out what's going on, and then we start to create systems. Then we start to organize. And what's so amazing to me about time management is that the time it takes to fix time management challenges is not a long time, relatively speaking. You can get relatively quick wins. You can build relatively quick momentum. And an analogy that might make sense, right? Because often we hear, oh, well, if it took so long to get to where you are, it's going to take that much time to reverse. You might hear that in a weight loss example, right? It's a very popular industry for change or transformation. And people will often say, well, if it took you 12 years to get to this point, you can't expect success overnight. Well, of course not. But at the same time, the amount of time it takes to fix a problem often is much less than the amount of time it took to get to that problem. So if you think about a floor, for example, a hardwood floor that maybe hasn't been dusted in a while, maybe it's the back of a closet that you almost never use, and it took years for the dust bunnies to build up, for the sort of film of whatever gross film builds up on a hardwood floor when it hasn't been wiped down for years. It's gross. It took years to get there. But I can assure you that if you have a broom, a cloth, and a water, and maybe even a cleaning solution, those years of gross neglect can actually be fixed within a few minutes, right? The solution, because it's strategic, it's focused, it's intended to do something very surgical, it can be done. And I would say the same is true with time. Yes, it will take time to put all your different systems into place, to tweak them, to make them right for you. But in a relatively short amount of time, if it took 12 years to get to where you are, it's not going to take 12 years to fix your practice. So this is a really great entry point for anybody who wants immediate quick wins. And when you start to see, okay, these tweaks that I'm making, like if I can sit down and I feel the urge to procrastinate and I have a step-by-step tool that I can use, I've got a procrastination protocol download freebie. You're welcome to do that. We'll link to that as well. That might get you over that hurdle of procrastination. If you've got that in place, then you've now solved yourself, right? You're winning back time already and getting things done. So that's what I love about time management, is that it's a relatively quick solution. There's some really great tools that can help you. Yes, it's going to take time to develop your systems. Yes, you're going to need to adapt your systems over time. Yes, systems that work really well one day are not necessarily going to work really great the next day. That is okay. The point is you can make progress quickly. When you compare that to something that takes longer, well, it can feel really good. So you get quick results. You immediately see gaps too, right? If you can solve for the technical aspects of practice management challenges, right? Time and practice management. If you start to implement tools and you see, wait a second, I'm doing the things I'm supposed to do. I'm not procrastinating anymore, and I'm getting things done and I'm organized, but this still doesn't feel right. That's often a sign that there's something more there, right? You'll start to see the next step. So for example, if you think about a more tangible analogy, right? A closet, for example, you might think about, okay, I'm organizing my closet, you're organizing your closet, and you come across a shirt that you bought years ago. Maybe you bought it at a really nice store and it looked really beautiful, but the minute you put it on, it's itchy, right? It doesn't feel right. Or the color's off. Whenever you try it on, you're like, ooh, this looks gross. Maybe I'll wait for the summer when I have a tan. Maybe it'll look better. But summer comes and you're like, it's still gross. And so you might find it hard to part with because you've invested in it. And sometimes that's what we're doing with our time, right? You are spending your time on something and you can make time for it now, right? You've organized your closet, but you know that you're never going to wear that shirt. You've organized your time, but that task that you still are making time for isn't right. It doesn't align with where you want to go. So you'll start to see the gaps, right? If you get on top of your time, you start to see the gaps, you know that there is something deeper. And then finally, what I love about time management, and again, this is really following the 3 layers of the podcast series here, right? Is that you'll see the what, and then you'll start to see the who. As you control your time, you become the person who is the architect of your day, what's happening there at a very microscopic level, but also macroscopic, because the more you do it, the more space it fills, is you're shifting from a person who's reactive to a person who is creative, a person who is in control, a person who is setting the pace and then following through. That's a shift. That's an identity shift. If you see yourself as someone who's taking orders, who's following someone else's checklist, who's box ticking, right? And many lawyers are unconsciously doing that because of the way that they have been raised, right? Get good grades, go to school, get your pre-law program in place, write your LSAT, go to law school, join a firm, get called to the bar. There's a checklist until there isn't. And so what can happen at this unconscious level is that you're waiting for somebody else to give you the checklist. So when you start to control your time at a very tangible and microscopic level, sometimes you're now being the architect of your time, and that's shifting you from being relatively reactive to relatively proactive. So there's different layers, and I love that time management lets you do all of these things. So if you're listening to this episode and you're thinking, okay, I want to make some changes, I want to manage my time better, you want to manage your time better, I'm going to leave you with 3 different ideas here. And these are all areas that I can support you with. And again, this is me revealing to you the recipe book, the playbook, well, sort of at a very broad level, because within my playbook, I've got all my micro recipes, right? All the tips and tricks and strategies and tools that I use with my clients, because every client is different. What resonates with every client is different. But for you, there's 3 main areas that you can focus on, whether you do this on your own or whether you do this with the support of a coach, whether that's me or another coach that you work with. So we want to start with systems, right? You have a time management problem. Let's start with systems. So that means looking at tracking your inputs. First of all, where is your work coming from, right? How do you keep track of the files that you have, the work on your plate, new work that comes in? We want you planning, right? How do you plan your time, right? And how often do you plan your time? And so when you work with me, we'll develop systems, a cadence, things that you do routinely so that planning becomes part of your process. Then we'll need to talk about prioritizing. So we talked a little bit about that already, but what needs to happen first and when, and how do you plan in a way that your priorities get the attention they deserve in the sequence that they deserve it? And how do you prioritize? What criteria do you use to decide what goes first relative to what doesn't go first? And urgency may be driving the show right now. And sometimes it's true urgency, something that actually needs to get done because there's a filing deadline or it really is important. Sometimes urgency is, I don't like the way that my boss looks at me when I know that I haven't responded to an email. So I'm going to put that first, even if that email is not urgent. So how are you assessing urgency? How are you running your practice? And scheduling. So how do you translate the things that are on your plan onto your calendar so that they get done? So that to me is the systems category. Then the second category, I said there's 3, is dealing with roadblocks. So the beautiful thing about creating a plan is that you end up with this really gorgeous thing, right? Sometimes it's a perfectly crafted calendar. But as you know, plans don't necessarily work out the way that you want them to, right? There's this fantasy about the way that your life is going to look, and then there's the reality of being in it. And sometimes even when you have the fantasy, the thing that you wanted has come to fruition and you're in it, you're like, oh, like this does not feel at all the way that I anticipated. So what happens with time management is we can't just plan for things. We also need to be able to be present in the moment and deal with the challenges that you are absolutely going to face. Some of those are internal, right? That voice inside your head that causes you to procrastinate, that feeling in your body of dread when you sit down to do the dreaded task, whether it's answering your emails at 3:45 in the afternoon and you're exhausted and the last thing you want to do is read through that mountain that's stacked up in your inbox. Nobody wants to do that. Your timesheets, nobody wants to do that at the end of the day. Maybe it's that argument where you just don't even know where to start. You're overwhelmed. So we need to figure out ways to deal with internal challenges like procrastination, like getting distracted. You want to procrastinate, your phone's right there. There's that thing you were looking at online the other day. Could you go back to that motivation, right? That thing that we talked about before where when the deadline is imminent. You're highly motivated, but that deadline has come and gone. You've just finished a trial. You've just closed a deal. You've just gotten back to your office after 3 weeks of vacation and nothing is urgent and you feel like it's impossible to move forward. These are the internal challenges that we need to have strategies for so that you can move forward and get your work done. And then, of course, there's external challenges. These are the things that are beyond your control. The emails that keep flooding into your inbox, the interruptions, the phone calls, the colleagues that just stop by, the clients who leave everything to the last minute and then they need your attention, not now, but right now. Emergencies, right? Things that truly were unpredictable that happen and you need to respond. New work that comes in that you want to prioritize because you want to show that you're keen, you're interested, you value your client, and yet you've got other projects on the go. Uneven workflow, right? The fact that your practice is really busy one season, really dead the next season. How on earth do you deal with that over time? And then finally, communicating, right? How do you have the difficult conversations? How do you talk about boundaries? How do you talk about this is not going to show up the way that we wanted it to? The timelines are unfortunately not going to be adhered to. I need to ask for an extension. Will you please reschedule our meeting? The communication that comes when you start to get a really good handle on your time and you realize you're going to have these conversations. You can't just sweep it under the rug, right? We need to deal with these. And then finally, the third layer, right? So we talk about that whole forecasting, planning. We talk about scheduling. We talk about getting things on paper. The plan is there. That's step one. We then deal with what happens when things don't go to plan or we have trouble executing our plan. That's step two. And then the third is alignment, right? That's where we start to look at what you're doing and does it align with the practice you want to have, right? Your career goals, right? We'll talk about that next week. Clarity. And then finally, does it align with who you are? The person, the professional that you want to be. And when you have disconnect between what you're doing, the how, the execution, your day-to-day tasks, and who you are as a person, that's when things can feel off, right? You've got that sense like this just isn't right. And so that's where we get into that deeper layer of coaching, right? Are we aligning the way that you spend your time with what you want and who you want to be? So it's pretty exciting when you do it. And it's work I absolutely love. So you can do some of this on your own. I mentioned there's some great podcast episodes. I'll mention more episodes too in those latter two categories. So career clarity and leadership as we get to them. Time management, I've mentioned a number of resources. So the podcast roadmap that provides summaries and organized summaries of all the different topics from this podcast series. Since it started, we're at 260-ish episodes already, and a number of those are about time management. So you'll have a nice roadmap. You can look at that and say, this is where I want to start. Maybe it's executive function. Maybe it's planning. Could be any of the different areas that we've talked about today. So that's a resource that's free, that's downloadable from this podcast. There's the procrastination protocol. I mentioned that as well. And so you're welcome to check those out and to see where that gets you. And if you wanted to work with me, then please do reach out to me. Send me an email, send me a DM on LinkedIn, find me somewhere online. I know it's quite doable because I've got a few different websites and things out there. So I'm confident you'll be able to find me and let me know that you want to talk about this. And I can support you one-to-one, right? As your coach, we will figure out what you'd want to work on and how you would do that. And I can also support your team, right? If you are in an organization where you have speakers sometimes who come in and speak to your lawyers, you can bring me in. And I love talking about time management. I think it is such a great topic because we all have hours in the day, minutes in the day that we want to use efficiently, effectively. And when you have a room full of people talking about time, you have opportunities to learn from each other. Your team will learn from its own members, what works, what doesn't, systems, strategies. You'll learn how to communicate with each other better. You'll have the fertile ground for conversations that can take place long after the presentation. So if you want that, if you want to talk about time, bring me in. I would absolutely love to do that. I'm talking about time a lot lately, and I will continue to talk about time, and I would absolutely be delighted to hear from you if that's something that you're interested in. So with that, I'm going to sign off. This has been a much longer episode than I had forecasted. We're almost at an hour, so thank you for sharing this time with me. I hope what you've gathered from today is that there are so many places where time can be leveraged, systems, solutions. If you're struggling with your time, I hope you feel not alone if you can relate to any of these. And I hope you feel supported. And if you want my support, please reach out. I would love to hear from you. And I'll be back next week and we're going to talk about career strategy. So stay tuned. I'm excited to share that with you. And any questions in the meantime, you know where to find me. Take care. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.